This podcast contains adult themes and graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
A commercial-free version of this podcast is available on Patreon for $1 per month. Patreon.com/Beyond Contempt Podcast. I'm Renee, and this is Beyond Contempt True Crime. So, it's the end of an era. This is the last case that I will record in Madison, Wisconsin, a place I've called my home for over 2.5 decades. After I hit publish on this episode, I'm going to pack up my recording equipment and head down to Nashville with my dogs. My Wisconsin accent might just morph into something a bit more southern. We'll see. Fitchburg is a suburb of Madison, with a population of about 30,000 people. Like many places in this area, you might find a $700,000 home not far away from apartments where police are called every night to break up drug deals, domestic violence, or gang shootings. You would think neighbors would watch out for one another here, but people rarely pay attention to each other. They don't say hello to strangers, most mind their own business. Many crimes fly under the radar. I lived in Fitchburg for several years after I graduated from the university. I lived less than 3 miles away from this little girl who was being severely abused by her adoptive mother. One day, this little girl disappeared. No one noticed, no one paid attention. Sadly, no one reported it. Was I paying attention? I don't know. You're listening to episode 45, Erika Antoinette Hill. Erika Antoinette Hill was born in 1992 to a mother who struggled with drug addiction and could not take care of her children. Her mother gave Erika up to her great-aunt. They lived in Joliet, Illinois, until her great-aunt passed away in 2001. Erika was then adopted by Minnie Hill, who was the great-aunt's daughter, and was also the cousin of Erika Hill's drug-addled mother, who unfortunately passed away in 2009. Minnie Hill moved her family to a suburb of Madison called Fitchburg, and they had a place on Red Arrow Trail. Erika Hill's life was a nightmare. She and her cousins/siblings suffered daily beatings from their mother, Minnie, who also went by the name of Marie, but at some point changed her name to Talon. Talon was perpetually violent. If the children only got punched or slapped that day, they considered it a win. Most days, it was much, much worse. Erika always received more physical abuse than the rest of the Hill children. Talon took Erika to the hospital after her hand was smashed by a hammer. The nurse who treated her asked Erika to change into a gown so she could undergo an examination. Talon cut the medical appointment short and took Erika home. Had that exam continued, the nurse would have discovered the immense amount of abuse Erika had endured was scarring all over her body that accumulated from years of maltreatment. From 2000 to 2005, the abuse in the Hill House of Torture was sort of investigated, but it always fell short of authorities taking any action. Talon pulled her kids out of school in 2004, and the family became difficult to track down, so the abuse remained underground and out of sight. Community members suspected everything was fine in the Hill household. Talon was purportedly a religious person. Her neighbors and her community acquaintances thought she took excellent care of her family. She also worked in the Madison Metropolitan School District as a special education teacher. One day, Talon Hill called up 2 of her daughters, who were working a shift at the local Culver's fast food restaurant. She summoned them home under the guise of a family emergency, and once they arrived, Talon led them to the bathroom where Erika's lifeless body laid on the ground. Talon's daughter, whom we will call KM, demanded to know what she did to Erika. Talon claimed Erika was already on the floor when she went into the bathroom. Her body was cold and unresponsive. They left Erika's body on the bathroom floor that night. When the family got up the next morning, Talon made 2 of the kids carry Erika's body out to the garage. They wrapped Erika up in trash bags and set her on the freezer. Talon attempted to remove Erika's teeth to prevent law enforcement from identifying who she was. After a while, the body decomposed and the smell was undeniable. Talon Hill developed a plan. She and her kids loaded Erika's body into the car and then headed to Chicago, which was about 2.5 hours south of Madison. The family drove all around Chicago for several hours until they pulled up to an overpass. They carried Erika out of the van, placed her body under the overpass, and lit her on fire. After the Hills returned home, Talon freaked out and worried that some elderly person would find Erika's body and have a heart attack. They drove back to Chicago, picked up Erika's corpse, and drove to Gary, Indiana, where they dumped her body in a random vacant building. Talon told the children that if anyone inquired about Erika, they were instructed to say that she went back home to Joliet, Illinois, to live with a family member. The Hill children complied with what Talon said because they were fearful. She threatened them that if they told anyone the truth, that they would be next. After Erika's death, Talon's abuse of the children lessened a bit. Instead of using objects to hit her children with, she switched to her hands. Talon's daughter, KM, tried to tell people about Erika. She told an ex-boyfriend one time, but wasn't sure he even believed her story. She also contacted one of her cousins via Facebook, and that cousin started looking into the situation. A body was found on February 26, 2007. 2 brothers discovered the charred victim that had been dumped in the entrance of an abandoned building on 2nd Avenue and Polk Street in Gary, Indiana. The person had been stabbed, beaten, and asphyxiated. There was a piece of cloth left inside her mouth. The medical examiner confirmed they suffocated her, and that was the cause of death, which was ruled a homicide. The female victim was 5'4" to 5'6" inches and petite at 102 pounds. They estimated she was between the ages of 16 and 25. Law enforcement could not identify the body further and dubbed her the Lake County Jane Doe. The condition of the body was awful. It appeared they burned the body in another location, as there were not any signs that they had set the fire in the vacant house where she was found in Gary, Indiana. Her teeth were broken or missing. The body sustained blunt force trauma, and there were countless injuries that had been inflicted at different time periods, as they were all in various stages of healing at the time of death. There were 170 wounds in total on her face and body. The poor condition of the body made it impossible for identification. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children mocked up a few drawings of what they thought she would have looked like. These photos were used by the Gary, Indiana Police and Coroner's Office. They went through missing persons lists, trying to find anyone who might have matched. They hoped that maybe a worried family member had reported this girl missing or was looking for her. As it turned out, no one reported Erika Hill missing. 8 long years had passed since they found the Lake County Jane Doe. On August 7, 2015, 25-year-old KM contacted police and told them a story that they could barely believe. This woman said that she and one of her sisters helped their mother, Talon Hill, dispose of a dead body, and the identity of the Lake County Jane Doe was Erika Hill. This woman came forward because she had been seeing a therapist and wanted to end the pattern of abuse that ran through her family. The therapist encouraged her to report this incident to the police. KM had done an internet search for unidentified bodies and ran across the photos of Erika that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had constructed. KM said that Erika could do no right in the eyes of their mother, Talon, and often received more physical punishments than the rest of the sibling cousins. There might have been some animosity between Talon and her deceased mother, who had been the full-time caregiver for Erika up until her death in 2001. Erika had been her favorite, and it may have been why Talon doled out extra punishment to the young girl. Talon would make Erika stand on just one of her feet and would repeatedly hit that foot until it bled. Talon also kept an extension cord hanging around her neck so she could easily pull it out and use it on the children. KM told law enforcement that Erika endured so much abuse that her complexion looked gray. Erika was not allowed to eat regularly, and this might have contributed to her unhealthy look. She said that she and her sister were terrified of their mother, and that was why they complied with everything she commanded, including disposing of Erika's body. One of the Hill kids denied their mom was abusive and would not corroborate KM's story. Another sibling told detectives a similar story as KM, and their youngest sibling thought he might have helped load Erika into the family van. KM told police that her older sister, 19-year-old Tierra Hill, went to jail in 2004 when she was picked up on a theft charge. She committed suicide while she was in the Dane County Jail. Tierra had told police about the abuse that went on in Talon Hill's home, but they never performed an investigation. We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. Thank you to Best Fiends for sponsoring this episode of Beyond Contempt True Crime, even though I'm a little bit stuck and can't seem to break into the 600 levels. But hey, I've never been on that high of a level before with anything in my life, so don't worry, I'll keep at it. I like to sneak a few extra games in when I need to take a break, especially from watching too many true crime TikToks, which is like my new favorite thing. Best Fiends is endless fun with thousands of levels to play and countless cute characters to collect. It's a casual game that you play on your phone, and you don't even need to be tethered to Wi-Fi because you can play it without an internet connection, which is great for me because my internet provider sometimes drops the ball. The challenging levels will help you maintain your A game and will keep your noodle sharp. More importantly, I know you will enjoy this game, so download Best Fiends, free on the Apple App Store or Google Play. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends. Now, back to the show. Detectives dug further into Talon's background. The Fitchburg police pulled school records and medical records to see if KM's story checked out. They saw that in October 2004, Erika was pulled out of Wright Middle School. Talon stuck to her story that Erika moved to another state to live with her family members. However, no other school system had contacted the Wright Middle School to let them know that Erika was enrolled elsewhere. Detectives found a record from Dean Urgent Care about an untreated hand injury Erika had in 2004, where Talon cut the appointment short because she feared the nurse would see all the scars on Erika's body. Dane County Human Services, or DCHS, had opened an investigation. Their report from 2004 stated Erika's school suspected she was being abused, but they had no addresses or contact information for any of the family members. School staff noticed all the injuries to Erika's body. There were many scars and scratches all over the little girl. DCHS tried to contact Talon, but could never get a hold of her, so they assumed she no longer lived in Fitchburg. The investigation was closed by the caseworker because there were apparently other explanations for all the scratches and scars on Erika Hill's body. What were those explanations? We don't know because the reasons were never reported. Talon had worked in the Madison School District since 1998 as a substitute special education assistant. She took a leave of absence in October 2004, the same time she pulled Erika out of school. Talon didn't return to her job, so the school district ended her employment contract in 2006. She returned to that job in December 2013. She was never investigated. No agencies ever made the connections with the incidents prior to 2005, and she was allowed to work with children during this time. They arrested 50-year-old Talon Hill on September 14, 2015, and they charged her with first-degree reckless homicide, along with 6 charges of child abuse. Talon was still working at her job for the Madison Metro School District when she was arrested in 2015. The district put her on leave, and her employment contract was contingent upon the outcome of her criminal trial. The charges shocked some people in the community, since Talon worked for the school system, and people never saw her abuse children in her care when she was out in everyday life. When Talon was interviewed by the Fitchburg PD, they found that she had been caring for her granddaughter, who also had many suspicious marks on her body. Detectives could not figure out why Talon dumped Erika's body in Gary, Indiana, since she had no ties to the area. They estimated that she randomly took the exit off the highway. Talon Hill's bond was set at $500,000, and they placed her on suicide watch as she waited for her trial to begin. Talon decided to cut a deal with the state, likely coming to terms with the fact that the jury would not look kindly upon her. In July 2016, she pleaded guilty to lesser charges, and on November 7, 2016, they sentenced Talon Hill to only 20 years in prison. Talon's relatives offered their insight into the sad story. One relative said Talon, too, had an abusive upbringing. He said it was a shame that she grew up that way. Another man who shared the same father as Talon Hill didn't understand how Erika ended up in Wisconsin under her care. Talon's nephew said she had a holier-than-thou attitude. They always knew something was wrong with her, and even called her Crazy Aunt Marie. When his father was in the hospital dying in July 2006, Talon showed up. The nephew's father didn't want her there and asked her to leave. Talon was incredulous that she was made to leave the hospital room. The nephew followed up touch with Talon Hill and her family. When Erika turned up dead in Gary, Indiana, he wanted to know how she ended up in the custody of his crazy aunt and why no one had looked out for her. Erika Hill's brother was 19 years older than her, and they shared the same mother. He left Joliet, Illinois, and moved to South Carolina before Erika's caregiver died in 2001. There was no will in that situation, so Talon picked Erika up 2 days after the death and took her to Wisconsin. Erika's brother said, for a lack of a better term, Talon stole her. The brother drove up to Wisconsin, intending to take custody over his then 9-year-old sister, but Erika did not want to move to South Carolina with him. Since Talon was religious and had a good job with the school system, he left Erika there. He knew Talon had a terrible childhood where she was sexually, physically, and emotionally abused. He thought there would be no way she would mistreat Erika or any of her children. The brother eventually lost touch with Erika, but later on tried to do some internet searches to see if he could find out where she was living. He also tried searching for Talon, but he had only known her as Minnie or Marie Hill, which were the names she had used when she lived in Joliet. He was unaware that when she moved to Wisconsin, she went by the name of Talon. This made it impossible for him to track them down. Talon formally changed her name in 2011 when she went through the official channels of the Dane County legal system. Erika's brother lives with regret that he allowed Talon Hill to take his sister. He thought Talon's history made it unlikely that she would repeat the cycle of abuse, but he was wrong. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Beyond Contempt. Please visit BeyondContemptPodcast.com for the links to the sources and music used in this episode. Research, writing, editing, audio production, and sound design were performed by me, Renee. Thank you to new patron, Michael V. I appreciate you supporting the show. If you like the show, please leave me a positive review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much, everyone.
I gotta keep driving till I stop caring. All I ever needed was you and I driving through the sky, the middle of the night. to Fairbanks. I'll just keep driving till I stop caring. Got a hotel in Cheyenne when I had a nervous breakdown, because I'm not really sure where the hell I'm going. But I'm gonna keep driving till I forget about Wheeling, West Virginia. All I ever needed was you and I, driving through Alaska, the middle of the night. All I ever needed was you and I, driving through Alaska, the middle of the night. Driving through Alaska, the middle of the night.